Hi, welcome to The Conversation. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this episode, I want to talk about the film Silence, and in particular, why I think its central conceit is so fundamentally flawed. Silence is a 2016 film from the great Martin Scorsese based on a book of the same name. Now, the fact that this is a Martin Scorsese film means that technically this is a pretty stunning achievement. It's a very impressive film from a technical perspective, but that's not what really interests me today, and it's not what I'm going to talk about. I want to talk about the story and the central conceit of the story and why, in actual fact, I think it is so fatally flawed, and ultimately, despite the beauty and the amazing skill that's on display in making this film, the story itself and the central conceit of that story is ultimately extremely ugly. For those who don't know the story, basically it goes like this. This is a film that's set in Japan a few hundred years ago. It focuses on some Christian priests who have come from Europe into Japan to try and evangelize, to try and promote and spread the Christian faith. What they've met there, though, isn't just resistance, it's actually a hostile Japanese state. And so there's a lot of persecution and very cruel and unjust treatment of Christian believers going on. And there's a rumor floating around that one of their fellow Jesuit priests who went before them has actually apostatized. He has publicly renounced his faith. He has turned from the faith in a very public kind of way. And this story focuses on the Jesuit priests who come after him, who really can't believe that these rumors are true, and they're trying to get to the bottom of the story of what's actually gone on here. The film is really about one particular priest, one character in this film played by Andrew Garfield, and it follows him as he is eventually captured by the authorities, and then they begin to torture him to try and get him to renounce the faith. And what they do is they turn their attention on a group of fellow Japanese Christian prisoners who have been captured along with him, and they begin to torture those prisoners. And they say to him that as long as he holds out and refuses to renounce his faith, they will keep torturing these people. And so what he does is he capitulates. He rejects his faith. He publicly renounces his faith as being a lie. He blasphemes a holy image. They ask him to step on a Christian image to really prove to the public and to the watching world that he has truly abandoned his faith. And so he does this, and then the film follows him. He lives out the rest of his days in a sort of silence, quote unquote, and that's pretty much the story of the film. And what the film does is it presents this idea that what he's done is truly heroic and courageous, that by renouncing his faith, he's actually done a very Christ-like thing. Here's the deal. That's a nonsense, and it has surprised me to see Christian commentators endorsing this completely erroneous idea. Now, hold on for just a second there. You might be watching this and thinking, well, Brendan, I'm not a religious believer, so I don't really have much interest in this. This is actually bigger than just the question of the Christian religious faith, which is effectively the thing that's put on trial and interrogated in this film, Silence. So hang in there and let me give you an example of something completely different to show why this is fundamentally flawed and why the central conceit of this film is actually extremely ugly. It's a lie. Let's imagine for a second that this had nothing to do with Christianity, and let's perhaps put this in a completely different time and place. Let's imagine that this is about a civil rights campaigner who goes into the American South during a time of great persecution and unjust treatment of people who are not white in those regions. And let's say that that civil rights campaigner is captured and they are put in prison, and the local state authorities, who have also got a group of black prisoners there with them, start threatening this man and saying, we are going to start exacting cruel treatment upon those prisoners unless you renounce and reject the truth of civil rights. And not only that, but we've got this image here of Martin Luther King Jr. We want you to spit on this image, to stand on it in public and show the world that you reject civil rights, that you are publicly making this very bold statement that civil rights is a lie, you are rejecting it, and you have no more interest in pursuing the cause of civil rights. And if you don't do that, we're going to start doing things like we're going to start taking meals off these prisoners. We're going to extend their sentences arbitrarily and unjustly. We're going to deprive their families of their homes. We're going to ensure that no one else in their family can ever work and have meaningful employment. And we're going to do all these things unless you renounce civil rights. Or let's imagine another scenario, completely different again. Let's imagine this is some sort of dictatorship, a cruel and brutal dictatorship that's governing a particular country or region. And a group of pro-democracy campaigners is captured, and one of those campaigners is put on trial, and they say to him that unless you renounce democracy publicly, and unless you tear up this flag and burn this flag of some particular country that is known around the world for its democracy, then we are going to start torturing another group of prisoners until you renounce, until you renege, until you apostatize on your commitment to democracy. And let's say in both those cases that the civil rights campaigner and the pro-democracy campaigner, they capitulated and they did those things. Are you seriously trying to tell me that we would look at those people and say, wow, that was courage, that was amazing? Now, here's the thing. People will look at this and they say, but Brendan, no, that's not really fair though, is it? Because what this guy did in silence was he capitulates to try and save these other people. So isn't it kind of courageous? He's renouncing his faith, the most beautiful and important thing to him in his life, and he's putting that aside in order to save these people. Now, I've heard commentators claim that this is extremely Christ-like. This is just like what Jesus would do, which is complete nonsense. In actual fact, Jesus never capitulates. He either maintains an unwavering silence, which, by the way, is what you would expect to see in this film, is that if you've got a Christian priest, he might not be speaking out publicly to his jailers and the brutal tyrants who are torturing him and those other people, and he might not mount an impassioned defense of his faith, but at the very least, he would hold a silence, a resolute silence, an unwavering commitment to that truth, and he wouldn't ever reject the truth, because ultimately the truth is so important that you should never ever reject the truth. I think everyone knows that, regardless of whether they have religious belief or not. If something is actually truly true, you hold on to it. You don't ever let it go. You don't ever renounce it. You don't ever spit on it in a very public way, because clearly that indicates that for you, it's not actually true at all. And that's the example of what Christ gives us if you read the Gospels. He holds the line, either in resolute silence at certain moments, or he actually speaks out against the lie, the injustice, the error, and very boldly. He never, ever capitulates, regardless of what the cost is. So this is not a model of Christ at all. Now, people look at this though and they go, but Brennan, look at the consequences here. Sure, he rejected his faith. He rejected what he believed to be true, but as a consequence of that, he saved this group of people over here. This is kind of like the trolley car problem. You know, there's a trolley car out of control coming down the tracks, and there's a junction point, and you have control of a lever. And if you pull one lever, the trolley car will go in one direction, and there's, 20 people stuck on the track, and they'll get killed by the trolley car. If you pull the lever the other direction, it will head down a completely different track where there's just one small child playing. What do? And the consequentialist would say, well, I pulled the lever and I killed the child, but I saved those other 20 people on the other track. And so, look, the consequence, the outcome justifies what happened here. Now, leaving aside the fact that that is a terrible moral philosophy, because what that moral philosophy means is that you can actually justify any evil action as long as you can show that it will produce a greater good. And that is an extremely terrible way to think about your moral actions. Because think about this for a second. We could actually achieve a much better, more economically cost-effective and healthier society if we went about forcibly sterilizing and even deliberately ending the lives, giving lethal injections to every person who carried illnesses, sicknesses, who were unhealthy, who were overweight. If we effectively went on a eugenic spree and we eliminated and forcibly sterilized everyone with the wrong genes, who was actually holding our society back and who was keeping us in a state where our health was not at its optimum, then guess what? We would actually get a really good outcome out of that going forward. We'd have a healthier and more cost-effective society. There'd be less burden on the taxpayer, but that would be an extremely evil thing to do, regardless of the amazing consequence you got out the end of it. But leaving that aside, if you apply a purely consequentialist moral view to what he did here, which it seems to me is what most people who praise this film are actually doing, even this scenario itself fails the test of consequentialism. Because if you look at this and say, well, look, he saved that group of people in the prison from torture, that's one way of looking at it, but there's a much bigger problem here that you fail to account for, I would argue. And that is the fact that his actions don't just have ramifications for that small group of people in that jail, they have ramifications for everyone. You see, what he has done by publicly renouncing what he believes to be true and claiming that it's a lie is he has given power to a brutal and tyrannical state. He has actually empowered a psychopathic and brutal form of dictatorship. And it's not just the fact that he's done this, it's also the fact of who he is in this particular story. He's a foreigner. So you have a foreigner saying, I reject my foreign customs and the foreign religion I brought with me, and I believe that the local customs are the only true ones. It's not just that, though. It's even more powerful what he's actually done, because you realize that he's a priest. He's a religious leader from the very religion that he is now apostatizing from. So what he's doing is he's actually giving a powerful endorsement to the lie. He is actually giving his agreement and endorsement to a form of brutal and tyrannical dictatorship. And that has implications not just for those people in that group of people in the jail for whom the torture and the immediacy stops. It actually has ramifications for everyone else in that society as well. What it does is it empowers a lie, a brutal and psychopathic lie. He's helped to empower the lie, and the consequence of that for people outside of the jail is far worse. Not only that, but if you were an outsider looking in on this, and you saw someone capitulate on what they believe to be true, you're probably going to say, well, this truth can't be that important, because this person capitulated and he renounced it and he's called it a lie. If you saw a civil rights campaigner reject civil rights, for example, in a segregated and hostile and very racist part of the American South, then guess what? You're probably going to look at this and say, yeah, well, civil rights are a lie. His actions would have just discouraged people from actually fighting what is a truly good, noble, and just cause. A lot of people would look at that and they would say, some people would say, well, it's clearly not true because it can't be that valuable and important. Other people would look at that and say, well, there's no point in getting involved in that fight because it's just going to cost you your life. And the very leaders, the very people who claim to be the champions of this cause are just capitulating on this and abandoning it and calling it a lie, though clearly it can't be true. So why would I take up the cause of civil rights? He's actually just set back the cause of truth in a massive way by endorsing the lie. And that's the fundamental flaw with the central conceit of silence. And regardless of what your religious beliefs are, this is really a question about truth and what is reality. And if you claim that you believe that a particular vision of reality is the truth, and then you abandon that vision of reality, and you publicly denounce it and claim that it is a lie, and you endorse the actions of a brutal psychopathic dictatorship, you are not actually doing a good thing at all. You are not being like Christ in any way by doing that. In fact, you are empowering the lie. This is the ultimate irony of silence, is that his silence is a powerful thing, but his silence is actually deafening in the way that it gives a powerful and ringing endorsement to a brutal and unjust dictatorship. That's the flaw. That's the problem. It's an act of moral cowardice to sit back. The role model, the real example here, was the other character played by Adam Driver, who dies desperately trying to save a group of Japanese Christians who are being tortured, drowned one by one by being dropped off the side of a boat. And he himself sacrifices his life swimming out to try and save those people. That is the model of heroism. That is the model of courage. That is the virtuous thing to do. What Andrew Garfield's character did was not virtue at all, and don't let anyone tell you any different. Thanks for watching this episode of The Conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and give this video a thumbs up. That all helps the channel. And wherever you're watching, please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the little notifications bell as well. That way you'll get updated about every new piece of content that we publish. A huge thank you to everyone who is supporting us at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. For as little as $1 a month, you can help to ensure that this great content keeps happening. So that's patreon.com/leftfootmedia. As little as $1 a month or as much as you'd like to contribute. And a huge thank you, as I said, to everyone who made today's episode possible. You guys are awesome. I'll see you next time on The Conversation.